I quickly realized that mass adoption wasn't just going to happen because we had the right crypto rails or the right user experience. It was going to happen because we were able to use crypto to create new experiences that never really just existed before.
Yeah, I do not want my heart on my sleeve. I cannot let them see in too deep, cause I know they can use it against me. Only one I can trust is me. I got niggas I keep around.
Episode 32 of Invest in Music with Peter from 1KX. Today we talk about his background founding Metacartel and investing in the consumer crypto ecosystem. He talks about his journey using a bunch of products on-chain and what it looks like for us to be building the next generation of products that are going to bring people to the space. As a reminder, you can collect this episode on investinmusic.xyz. It's the best way to support our guest. Peter and I have had a long history together, so without further ado, let's get into one of our more deeper conversations with Peter from 1KX. What is going on, guys? We are back. We got the man, the myth, the legend, Peter Pan in the building. Peter, how are we feeling today, man?
Doing great.
For those who couldn't see, Peter just flashed his cat at the camera, so you know it's a great day to get started out here.
He's attacking. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun episode. Peter and I have had quite the history together in Web3. He is actually the founding member of Metacartel DAO, which is the first DAO that I ever joined. He's now working at 1KX, doing a ton of consumer crypto investing, and has some of the spiciest and most honest takes on Twitter these days. So felt like a good time really just to square up and just talk about the current state of all things crypto, more specifically the state of consumer crypto. So before we do that, Peter, why don't you go ahead and give a quick background on yourself?
Yeah, I spent, I've been at 1KX for the last, let's say, over 3 years. Before then, I spent about 3 years as well building this community known as Metacartel. TLDR, it was like the community, the community has a logo of a dance, it's effectively a dancing chili. It's got the name of a virtual cartel. But it's not all menacing. It started as a UX working group and really just became the first community for application layer builders to come together to discuss how do we build things that inspire people and create value for end users, right? And a lot of that just came about from the fact that I was just like heavily unemployed in Web3. I love bragging about this. It's like and me who knows, may even be out on the streets working at McDonald's once again. But I was a designer before, and it was pretty apparent to me in 2018 that everyone was a bit far too deep down the infrastructure rabbit hole. And yes, there were many valid concerns around scalability, user experience, etc. But I quickly realized that mass adoption wasn't just going to happen because we had the right, crypto rails or the right user experience. It was going to happen because we were able to use crypto to create new experiences that never really just existed before, right? And I'm still on the hunt for potential teams and, projects, and have found a lot of great teams and supported them through 1KX. But I would really say that's really just been my, end goal this whole time in crypto, which has been like a 6-year journey. And the question is really, how do we use this thing known as crypto as a new medium, as a new substrate to build fun things, that just like make people feel something, right? That's really consumer at the end of the day. Most consumer decisions are impulse driven, right? Snapchat makes a lot of its money off, a $2 in-app purchase that restarts your streak, right? That was Nikita Beer's sort of like tweet a while ago. And so much of the reason I spend money myself in games like Fortnite or Roblox or Genshin is because I feel like I want it. And I spend a lot of my money in Web3 collecting like $5, $10 NFTs on chain because you know why? I like it, and I think like it's just like discovering like what, how technologies make us feel. And I think we're still early in that journey of Web3. Like, how do we, use it just in the right way, right? To make people feel something, right? And I think there's set of different rabbit holes in which you can go down, but and I mostly spend my days thinking about like how that could happen and how that may emerge as a
I find it fascinating that we're 6 years in and it feels like we're just now getting to the point where the infrastructure can support like real grade consumer applications. And obviously I would say that we haven't really found one that seems to have like really stuck and been kind of the, you know, design infrastructure build out that I think everyone can acknowledge is like the stack to use when you're building a consumer crypto app. It still feels like we're playing around with a lot of different chains, a lot of different wallets, a lot of different UX experiences, but it does feel like we're sort of landing on fundamental principles that make these apps powerful, which is being able to transact for fractions of a penny, being able to have cross-chain interoperability, being able to do things that most people just wouldn't, you know, people would need to expect these things as someone that's going to use these apps. But what I find really unique about you and your story is that it all comes from a very crypto native background. And especially when you're making investment decisions, it feels like a lot of what you're doing is really stemming from this belief that tokens are where we're going to capture ownership. And I know 1KX is a fund, you know, the whole reason why I've always been so excited about it is that you've been very forward about recognizing that even if we abstract crypto away at some point in the future, it's all going to come back to basically tokens, if I had to broadly over summarize the thesis. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what that means to you.
Yeah, I think like, you know, 1KX's early thesis was really this idea that it was token networks and tokenized ownership that was really what was net new about crypto. It was not about, you know, plastering blockchains into supply chains, even as useful as that is. It just felt like a backwards way of using crypto for what it was, right? And Lass and Chris founded the firm, and really the firm was built on this idea. It was around token networks, right? And the fund had, you know, like Chris and Lass, I remember before I joined 1KX, were wearing shirts that said token Maximus at the back of the shirts. And at that time, people forget that in 2018 and 19, everyone hated tokens, and anything that touched a token was a scam. And it was the furthest thing from people's, you know, minds, really. It actually really reminds me of NFTs today.
Yep, so I was just about to say.
It's a death sentence, you know, in the, you know, like of sentiment of assumptions of good character, you know, and I guess it, you know, it in a way, back in 2018 and 2019, I remember using for about 9 months every end user application that was published on every chain back then on a weekly basis,
which was possible.
And from EOS, which is very possible through DApp Radar, State of the Dapps. Super, it doesn't seem as crazy, but in hindsight, it was like a crazy thing where like every week there'd be about like 20, 30 applications released. And about like half of them were like straight up gambling, not even like meta gambling or like Frentech style applications. It was straight up just slot machines on Tron and EOS.
Yep.
And you had some weird indie devs just like playing around with weird concoctions on XDAI network or whatever. And I actually even remember the day Ether Rocks actually came out. I actually wrote about it in my newsletter back then. And I was like, this is crazy. This is dumb. Who would buy it? But I remember distinctly the day that it launched. And I saw like weird things like marriage registries on chain. I'm like, who is creating this? But it was pretty stark that like there were no new like end user experiences, use cases that were just like, you know, interesting. It was either like super boring, shallow, or straight up gambling. And I sort of had this, you know, the space today gives me the same sort of feeling as it did back then. Except maybe it's like, oh, we have all these NFTs and digital assets, but mostly just gambling and speculation. I feel like, you know, if we did make progress maybe through the last couple of years, it was the net gain may have been, you know, we take like 10 steps forward, you know, 9.5 back. That half a step forward probably would have been this recognition and understanding of digital, like, I guess, digital property rights through tokens and NFTs and various other tokenized representations. They're sort of everywhere on the internet now, and yes, there's a stigma around them. It's hard to, you know, sell creators to create on-chain. It's hard to sell end collectors and end users to want them, but even at this, you know, the bottom, arguably, you know, you still have this, like, I would say, amalgama of activity, an obsession about this. And I remember, there being this amalgama or this center of obsession and activity that was just high in frequency, right? Back then as well. And that was what that grew. Despite how, the headline overshadowed crypto, that center of activity and obsession iteration stayed. And that was where the next real sort of innovations and exciting ideas came from. Like Uniswap wasn't maybe arguably Uniswap never, Uniswap is a product that enables speculation, yes, right? So what value has it created? But it's an idea that had never existed before, right? And it was possible through this idea of programmable money. And I think at the crux of this, we have programmable value, programmable virtual goods, programmable sort of canvases, right, for open possibilities. And I sort of think that we've made strides despite the sentiment today, and it's subtle. It's this idea that maybe people aren't super excited about digital collectibles or digital property rights today, but at least people actually understand what they are or intuitively understand it, perhaps, right? And the questions like form factor, sentiment, timing, how do you draw people in? What other use cases can you build beyond pure financialization, right? How do you get people to create instead of just consume? I think there's a lot of inroads to how we can and how the space can really develop, right? And it's really exciting in a way, as much as it's the sentiment is bad, and consumer and the consumer view in this is pretty dire. It does really make me quite excited to wake up every day and try new things, talk to founders trying new things too, because there was a time in where before everything really existed and blew up in attention, which you were able to talk to some of the smartest people in the world as your digital neighbor, right? And you never really knew what was going to work, and the people who made it work were just really right around the corner, and you could really learn from them, right? And I sort of feel the same privilege in a way. Back then I was kind of completely broke, living in hostels and couches, right? I was feeling the pain a little bit more. I think now, ironically, employed in today's day and age, I say that with some humor. I feel pretty privileged to sort of be in this position where I can sort of watch, right? And experiment, participate, and see where things go. And it's always in hindsight that you're thankful for being there, right? When no one else is sort of paying attention. And I feel pretty excited. I think there's a lot of ways in which we can still experiment, innovate in, and you just gotta, I feel like we're pretty rational as people. We just sort of let social momentum and sentiment and everything else that's really just noise cloud our judgment, right? You just I sort of think of that as as the same case for investing today. You see a lot of fund managers just not investing, but what happened to buy low, sell high, right? In a way. And I always felt this was the role of venture capital. It's to fund ideas no one else is willing to fund, right? Role of a venture capitalist is fairly moot during a bull market when you have angels putting in 250K checks. But I think the real job sort of begins when no one's willing to take the risk, really. It's really your job, right? But I also think it's just textbook investing too. And so I don't know, I'm rambling a little bit, but I sort of think this is where we are today. I'm really glad and just thankful to be an investor today. And I feel great about backing founders in this environment too. I think, we're going to see some of the, world's most important things, ironically, come out of this space, and it's always moments where the recent conflict in the Middle East, etc. I remember a couple years ago, it was COVID. It makes like crypto seem so insignificant, right? And it's like like even before COVID, it was like the rational thing for most smart people in the space was just to leave. And it was actually like everyone who was irrational, who had a vision that stayed, right? And yeah, I think I sort of, you know, I'm sort of pretty excited to see what comes out of like this period of like quiet iteration, right? But yeah, that's my little ramble.
Love it. There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, some things that come to mind is the first one you mentioned about just speculation being a predominant use case for crypto over the years. I feel like one sentiment that I felt is that there's such a strong desire to move away from speculation being the core use case of crypto. And I don't really understand why. Like, I don't understand why people feel so afraid to admit, like, the reason that crypto has ever worked in the past has largely just been because it's a new way to bet on digital objects. You know, you mentioned, like, the power of, like, digital provenance and digital ownership, and I think that all those things are valuable, but I think that more than people wanting to have digital goods, I think that the biggest potential for crypto is being able to bet on those digital goods. And I guess I'm curious to hear from your perspective when it comes to teams building consumer crypto apps today, who do you feel like is doing a good job just from like a thesis standpoint? So not even necessarily like what teams are doing the best, but what are some of the philosophies that these teams are using to inform the way that they're building their products today?
Great point. I think to your early point, I guess I would like to reframe my comment as like speculation more as like, rather than speculation, I would say I'd like to reframe it as maybe like hyper-financialization, right?
Right.
In the sense that like hyper-financialization, unbound speculation for the sake of financial expectation, it's like we've seen, it's a game that in which we know how it ends, right? It's just, it always full circle back to zero, people get hurt. You know, usually unsuspecting, you know, individuals or people from effectively normal people who don't necessarily understand how these games are designed, incentivized, right? So, and then the reason why I think we need to move away from at least hyper-financialization and financial maximization, right, is mostly because it's when it's unbound, it's incredibly unsustainable. And in a way, like zero-sum hyper-financialized games are finite. You know, one can only put so much of the network into something like fintech, you know, whereas, you know, like you buy things that you love for the entirety of your life. And obviously you can like draw comparisons with that, with investments but I really think, you know, it's like, so most consumer spend are driven emotionally, right? They're not financial decisions. In fact, you know, if you look at someone's mobile phone and what apps they have, usually it's the financial apps that bore them the most, the ones that they want to get out of as soon as possible. And yes, there's like a subset of individuals who love trading, who love investing, who love, you know, Robinhood, Wall Street bets, etc. But, you know, that's a segment, and it's a fairly niche segment. Most people just want to do cool things. Connect with their friends, connect with others, show off, flex on one another. You know, like just be a human, right? And it's a technology such as Instagram, right? Snapchat, Twitter, everything, online shopping. That's the medium which people get to express themselves, right? And it's always, I would say like the nuance of speculation is that I think the point I would like to clarify or make is like speculation for the sake of financial outcomes is probably, it's most likely like a one-way path to just unsustainability, but that doesn't mean, you know, speculation can heighten an emotional response, right? And you know, you sort of like speculation for emotional reasons or non-financial purposes or desires are fairly common. The strewn all throughout our entire lives. You know, trading card games like Magic the Gathering is not a financial game, yet it's all based on luck. Luck is somewhat, it's heavily tied with financially, or at least with speculation, right? It's the same reason you post something on social media, and then there's this anticipation of like, oh, okay, like who's gonna like it? Is the girl that you like gonna look at the story, right? Like it's who you're gonna go to this event, who's gonna be there, right? Like this anticipation, this arguably speculation of likely what's gonna happen is deeply ingrained in every part of our life, and except that it heightens the emotional response. And I sort of think that like value can heighten emotional responses around ownership too, right? Buying art is not as arguably powerful if you're at least spending a meaningful chunk of money to express how much you love that art, right? There's no love without sacrifice in a way, right? It's why you willingly buy your favorite band or artist's album, even if it's like limited edition and slightly expensive, or it's why you spend ridiculous amounts of money to go see Taylor Swift in real life. It's for the sacrifice, of what you really like. And I sort of think that like the nuances speculation for hyper-financialization is probably like a dead end. There's always going to be, but there's always going to be the segment that loves to drive fast cars, cars with the biggest engines. And I sort of think that this is the hyper-financialization crowd. It's always going to exist. It's always the degens. But then, most people just want to drive a car that like works and is stable, affordable, not going to kill you if you crash it, right? And I sort of think for everyone else, the 98% maybe, right? We're probably going to behave as humans that we've always have. It's emotionally. And the real question, right, is like, how do you use crypto? And maybe how do you use the unique, the most, like your point is like the most obvious or the most clear affordance of crypto, which is speculation to create more emotional resonance without being ultimately this zero-sum and unsustainable game. I like to think OPEPN is a really interesting example of this. I think there's arguments against around how like OPEPN reveals highly valuable above floor, but that's no longer the case. OPEPN, this is like weird. Nakuba might need to cut this and then like do a short bit on what is OPEPN, but I'm sure you understand like the OPEPN reveals have started to come down to floor, but people are still submitting their unreveals into the sets. And I think OPEPN is so interesting because it's not financial. It's pure anticipation of I want this art, I want to submit it, and I might get a reveal, right? And I do think that we need to sort of like think backwards a little bit sometimes when we build stuff on chain, and does this actually like is this cool? Is this fun? Is this incite something? Incite me at least, right? Mm-hmm. So anyways, you wanted to talk about which teams are doing this well, right? I think that the meta label. So I'm disclaimer, like 1KX is invests in meta label, but we think that they're doing things in a different way. If you go to the messaging, the story they're telling, they're not selling crypto. They're selling the how, the values, right? You look at Pudgy, selling cute penguins that you can then dress up and own, right? I sort of think like, you look at generative art, I think as much, generative art may be a bit more of a mixed bag, but at least before it became this unit of value, generative art, when Skrill was minted for $50, $80, it was just about appreciating the art. And I think arguably even before Axie blew up, became this huge accidental, bubble effectively. It was really just about building a community, right? And I sort of think, how do you do the same, but limit and guardrail consumers against like hyper financialized loops, right? And maybe not. Maybe that's naive, right? That's also like, I think about that a lot. Like, what if you just like full lean into full hyper financialization and speculation? But I don't know. Like, it doesn't. I think there's a nuance there that like maybe we haven't like touched on correctly, right? We know like one side is just like this, you're not really using crypto as a unique unfair advantage as a product. You just, you want to like this. Here's the thing with consumer products, right? It's like you actually have to, you're competing against Twitter, Facebook, Spotify, SoundCloud. Arguably, you're not even competing against them. You're competing for in between the gaps that they provide, right? Like the in between, right? You're competing for that space. You're competing for the depth that they don't reach, right? That's what you're competing for. And yeah, you know, when I think about that, I you know, most of my funnest experiences on chain and like the times I've like really just had a lot of fun were always usually non-financial. My favorite sort of examples, like, why do you collect a POAP? Right? You know, no one ever buys them. You can't sell them really. It's probably one of the use cases where it's like a pure non-financial use case. And you don't even know why you collect it. Here's the thing. That's the beauty about POAPs or collectibles in general, right? You collect it because you kind of have this gut feeling that you may want it, right? And why is that? It's probably because at some point you understood that you have an online identity, which you claim it, that POAP will, you know, signify that you were at the event. And maybe there's this implied sense of, yeah, like, you know, connection or belonging with others who collected it. Obviously, that's not super obvious today, but, you know, I wonder how much more meaningful these digital collectibles may be if you had the ability to socialize amongst holders a bit better, right? To see them on one's digital profile a bit better. At least like where, I know I'm going away from the tangent of like, okay, what teams actually do well. I think the biggest area in which I think that like the biggest like use case that's maybe use case is a bit too on the head, but the space for exploration is like self-expression and social connectivity via on-chain ownership graphs, right? So Facebook allows you to socialize with one another via sort of, you know, like, you know, mutual friends. Twitter is effectively a bit of a, depends. Today, at least, it depends, right? Could be professional, could be social. LinkedIn, it's highly professional. On Reddit, it's an interest-based social graph, right? Snapchat, one-to-one. But, you know, you have these different social graphs. And I sort of wonder if, like, you know, by putting data on chain and creating ownership graphs on chain, you almost create this, like, far deeper and more granular and more expressive graph of everything. Graph of everyone could click this button, right? So it's like when you mint an NFT, it's not just like you have this thing. It's like you created the ownership graph is a graph of everyone who like fucked with this content. It may even be like everyone who just liked this post. It can be everyone who owns this art. It can be everyone who went to this event, and you have this like, you know, completely, you know, open source public good that no one owns, which just represents like deeper ownership graphs. And I wonder, as it gets built out, people will start to discover each other and relevant individuals they want to connect with on chain. You know, if I went to this party, I probably, you know, there's probably a shared connection between me and other party goers, right? If I like this piece of art, or I like this piece of comment, or, you know, someone submitted a joke race submission, that was a funny joke or something, right? And everyone liked that and minted an NFT because of that. Maybe I get to connect with those people, right? It's like, how do you create, you know, it's like, because it's like Web3 in a unique way enables like, you know, a unique ownership graph of everyone who liked this meme, right? and it allows for like a more intimate connection because of that. And I sort of think like maybe it's like an emergent process where like the more data is put on chain, the more data accrues to your profile, the more likely you'll be able to connect with others because of that. And as that begins, like you'll find this like, you know, desire to self-express yourself because people are starting to see who you are on chain. Like, do you have this like far off vision that like, you know, over time, I'm not sure when, this is probably going to be the best way to represent who you are online. It's permanent. it's the sources of truth that you can't fabricate. It's historical. You can attribute any data from professional to personal to your profile. I think this seems like, I'm pretty sure this is where it will eventually land. I'm just not sure how and when, but yeah, I think this is an emergent area of exploration that you can't force, you can't speed up. It just needs to take time. But it feels like a really obvious, like, emerging sort of behavior that's really hard to see, not coming to life at some point. I don't know. That's my take. That's a ramble.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it'll come to life at some point. I think what I struggle with currently in the market is that it doesn't feel like there are compelling reasons to want to explore those design spaces. So for example, like building a deeper social graph, minting things on chain, being able to share your social profiles, etc. I think that we fall back on a lot of these tenets as almost like a North Star, like a silver lining or something like that. But I think in a lot of ways, something that we struggle with currently is that there's not new people coming into the space. I mean, like, I'm broadly over summarizing, but it doesn't feel like there's any new people coming in and using crypto applications. And I think when they do, I don't believe that it'll be because of what you just mentioned and saying that, like, there's going to be a deeper social graph here. I think that's just the byproduct. But I think the main thing that we really need to figure out, especially in today's real time, is like, what are the things that get people to want to come and use these apps today so that they happen to see those benefits tomorrow and then they stay there because we have this sort of deeper enriched social experience. But I really doubt that people are going to come to use these things because they are looking for an enriched or an enhanced social experience. To your point about the car and people just wanting to drive a car that works, like, they're probably pretty happy with Instagram. They're probably pretty happy with Twitter. And if we take it to music, most people are pretty happy with Spotify. And so I guess the way that I look at it is like, sure, there's an argument to be made that if you just make those social experiences deeper and more profound to you, it'll lead to stronger connections, which is a true statement. But I think that right now we're almost looking to extrapolate to that end goal before we figure out, like, what are the core tenets? Like, what is the thing that makes crypto as a fundamental principle the reason why these apps exist in the first place? To your point about, like, what is going to be the thing that's net new and different? You mentioned, like, in 2018, tokens were a death sentence. Being able to just, like, spin up a coin on the internet with some stupid name that anyone could buy and sell and possibly make some money off of, that was, like, the main thing. Like, the fact that you could buy something for $100 that your friend made across the world from you. You guys could both buy and sell the same thing in real time, 24/7, etc. And then on the back of that, you had group chats and you had, like, Discord chats and alpha chats of people trying to find these opportunities. So, like, that became the thing that made it exciting to stick around. But in the absence of there being that first thing, which is, like, people spinning up shitcoins essentially, that second thing doesn't exist. And I think that's what we see now in the bear market, is that you have collector chats, you have people that were buying a lot of NFTs in the bull market, etc. But the energy sucks because there's not something compelling that makes those conversations be relevant in the first place. And so I guess I'm curious to hear from your perspective as someone who's transacting on chain every day, etc. Where do you kind of see the current quote unquote meta being within crypto today that makes it compelling to be here for those conversations to be exciting and happening on the back end?
It's great points. I sort of think when, you find the most fun when you stop seeking it. I sort of think, like, I think, like, new mediums need some patience to sort of, like, realize their full potential. And there's a reason why usually art and games are usually the first use cases that come out of new computing innovations. It's because it's not super apparent in how you use the medium. Even with phones, it's like, great. Do you, like, put spreadsheets on these little devices and look at how's this going to help me use my spreadsheet? It took a while, and even took, like, just the right visionary to come and, like, invent the form factor, right? Which is, like, a smartphone. And I think I think, like, if you really ask those answers, it's like you'll come up with not much. And, well, here's the thing. It's like usually with consumer technologies, the reason something takes off is usually not even known for a while, because it's just so divergent and so random and so complicated too. It's like, why do people use Facebook? It's like initially there was one reason, but then there was many, right? And it just became this weird medium for weird things to happen, but mostly to flex and probably get laid, and maybe some making money. Maybe you get to, push products, push things because people are there already, right? I think at least I try to take a bit of a softer approach to consumer like investing and like the landscape of consumer. I sort of think a bit more about like I try to think about like, how do we use this stuff to have some fun? Because if people in it already aren't sort of having fun, like how do you bring it to others? And I think the nuance is like, maybe like we should stop like fun maybe isn't like the next great sort of unbounded Ponzi, right? But something new.
I mean, that's kind of like the I want to say it was like Mark Andreessen or someone, but he basically said like the next biggest thing on the internet starts out looking like a toy, and that's like very embedded of what you're saying there. And I think the one point that I want to pull out is that I feel like there's a tendency in crypto for teams to get so locked into whatever the past previous thing was when it comes to building new products or trying to figure out new cycles. You mentioned 2018 tokens. There was sort of the stigma around them being really negative. You had ICOs, right? And I think it took people a while to move away from like capital formation to like DeFi tokens, which were much more around like governance and rewarding people who would actually use the network. Then DeFi got like really overplayed out, and people were going like so many levels deep that people were like, okay, now we just want to do like fun things on the internet. Then you had social DAOs emerged, you had NFTs emerged. And I feel like we're kind of at this phase now where everyone's trying to fit what works in crypto into this box of like, oh, it has to be an NFT or something like that. And I just want to highlight that I think that the best way that you could have played crypto over the last 5 years was sell all of your ICO tokens. Top of 2017, leave for a year, come back, buy all the DeFi tokens, sell all of the DeFi tokens, buy all the NFTs, sell all the NFTs, and then put it in blank. And I think one reason that I just want to highlight that is I believe that there's this, whether it's an emotional or psychological reaction that like, oh, it's all going to come back. It's all going to come back. It's just a matter of time. We just need this all to come back, et cetera. But historically, what we've seen is that although there are outliers, maybe one or two of those teams from a previous meta or cycle does make it to the next one, the best thing you can do is basically just throw out all of the beliefs you had about what was quote unquote valuable within the last 2 or 3 years and just totally start to rethink like what's valuable today. Like in the absence of what was valuable previously, like it doesn't matter who raised a bunch of capital. It doesn't matter, who had the hottest thing like 2 years ago. It's kind of just like who's cool and new and exciting now. And I think something that I've been trying to ground myself in is looking to move away from this belief that like NFTs are the thing that are going to make crypto go mainstream, and recognize that they're just one of many things that could make crypto go mainstream. But the reality is the thing that's going to capture the mind share and the capital today is probably not NFTs. It's probably something that's fundamentally different from what existed in the past. And I think that's a large reason why something like FriendTech has gained so much mind share recently is that it's not NFTs. It's not NFTs. It's not tokens. It's creator shares on a bonding curve. It's on a layer 2. It's mobile centric. Like it's a completely net new design space. And one thing that I want to challenge people who are listening this to think about is like, don't get so caught up in your ideas needing to fit inside the box of like what existed previously. I actually think the best thing you can be doing is really challenging yourself to figure out like what are new ways to value my ideas on chain and to run these fun games that you're talking about in a model that doesn't conform to the existing playbooks that have been designed over the last couple of years, because it's probably not going to work. And you probably need to try something new if you want to see any remote degree of success in like the next 6-12 months to come here. Would you agree with that?
I think sometimes you look so hard, you look past what you were looking for too, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like where I'm at. Is that, I agree. But I would offer to like, listeners of like, if you want to, like build something new and interesting, like think from first principles and, stop looking so far into the past.
I'm sorry to cut you off there, but you just reminded me of something I want to make sure we capture here. So we obviously have this whole meta right now around like friend tech, right? And then you saw like this Hayden coin going crazy the other day, and then Ashley had a token and whatnot. You're actually one of the very first people to ever launch a quote unquote social token. I don't think many people know this, but you had this Peter Pan coin that represented an hour of your time.
Magic.
Can you talk a little bit about what that was and kind of like the little sandbox that caused you to want to experiment with that at that point in time?
Yeah, I was broke, so I needed some money for my flight back to Australia. So I set up a social token and represented an hour of my time. You could redeem it. And that was... Oh, yeah. And then I helped set up a memes coin called Sol.
Mm-hmm.
And that was about it.
But I think that kind of expanded into something that was like, then we had like Alex launch his token, then we had other creators launch their token. Right. I think something that feels interesting to me is that there was this kind of like little pocket of like social token experiments happening back then. I don't think they ever amounted to anything, but whether it's my bias or not, it does feel like there's actually starting to be a lot more momentum around like this idea of investing in creators and investing in brands. And I'm curious to hear if that's something that you're seeing on your side as well, which is to say that there seems to be a lot of mutual interest around like the best way to invest and support creators in the kind of market meta today.
Yeah, I think the thing about creators is that it's like it depends on the vertical, right? So creators are, like let's say, creators creating content for mass audiences on Twitch, Kick, they're incredibly hyper financially focused. Kick literally pays people to switch from Twitch to Kick, and that's all that matters. For them, it's a dollar bottom line, right? For certain other segments of creators and artists, yeah, it's less about money. But it's also sometimes a business too, right? So I think like there's like some nuance between like using financial rails to maybe like bootstrap and form capital for creators who ultimately are businesses versus using that to attract end users and consumers. And so I think there's a lot of experimentation here. I'm really big fan of what Triple Cosmos is doing. They're a K-pop band that is being incubated by Hashed, and they are selling NFTs of the K-pop band members, different headshots, different photos. It's very, think NBA Top Shot, right? Plus K-pop. I think that's really fun. And, baseball players had baseball cards. Why not K-pop, like stars, right? Or performers or artists. And, and I think like to your point, like there's so many instruments in crypto in which you can use to build a variety of outcomes, right? So you may take a dampened approach financially, right, with NFTs and with high, maybe even unlimited supply, right? Or you might, if you wanted something to bootstrap capital quicker, you might want to, create a bonding curve with creator shares and make it steep, right? To your point, like it's just the instrument, it's just a tool. You can, you use it to generate a variety of outcomes, and just like the crypto space is so small that it just every trend is like a little bathtub. It just like pushes everything from one side to another, and it's just trend after trend. But you zoom out, you're just getting new set of tools to do new things, right? And everyone's like figuring out a little bit of the puzzle slowly. But yeah, you kind of gotta zoom out and sort of think like, all right, how do I build something new? And I sort of think like to the quote, like everything big, the biggest things on the internet will start out looking at like a toy. That's the very reason I sort of like take such a user-first approach to my experience in Web3. I think it's just like so easy to overthink. And I do believe like the super hyper-rational view, if you're really in crypto, is just to leave. Because like the odds are really against the space, and like it's that's why I sort of like quiet my sort of squirrel or rat brain for a sec, or even maybe perhaps put my rat brain first a little. I sort of just think like, does this make sense? Does this feel good? Does this feel right? It's a bit, yeah. It does. It's meant to be a bit of a oversimplification, but I really think with consumer, you gotta taste it first, right? And you gotta feel it yourself, and you gotta experience it yourself too. And not only that, I spend a lot of time studying like Web2 products myself as a user. I get myself addicted to like Roblox, Fortnite. I get myself addicted to the hottest games just to understand like why people do so, right? And and I think that gives you a sense of the bar in which like great food, what great food tastes like, or what a great experience tastes like, right? But yeah, to the meme, I'm just in my lane, moisturized, focused. Well, but I'm not a big fan of overthinking it too much. But there's a balance.
I'm really glad that you brought up Triple S, because I actually went and saw them in concert on Friday here in LA.
Awesome.
And it was incredible. It was definitely like unlike any other show that I've seen before. And so for, just added context here, there's a label called Mode House that's basically developing an app that lets you vote on different members of these K-pop groups, everything down to the members of the group, to the songs that are on the album. And this performance, there was 12 girls on stage, diehard merch, line, 300 people deep out the door, despite the fact that this was like their first time ever coming to the US. And I just noticed that there was such an opportunity to create deeper fan experiences for the ways that you sort of participate in live shows. Like they would perform a song and then they would break and they'd talk about, this is my personality, I'm this girl, this is my favorite song, I'm going to do like a 15-second teaser dance, etc. And it went deeper than just like loving the music to like you actually started to develop a love for the different girls that are in this group. And so you had all these different variations and combinations, and I don't know, just zooming out a bit, it just started to get me excited about, like, to your point about net new social experiences that haven't existed before, being able to go to a show and pull up an app and say that I want to see this song performed next, and then having that group actually play that song next because there was like a very direct relationship between the two. That stuff gets me super excited. And I found it really interesting that being here in LA, it's kind of like we live in this world where artists have no structure or function. They're just making music all throughout the day. Like, artists just live a very free life. And I think there's something beautiful to that. The K-pop world is the exact opposite. It's like supported by the government, like the government's investing in these music businesses. Like all these girls are literally going to boot camp to study these dances down to a T, to like every last place that they're supposed to stand on stage. And I just think it's very interesting to recognize that there's a lot of different ways that this can go. But one thing that I wanted to pull out that you just said earlier about the Peter token, which I think is really relevant, is I asked you, like, why'd you make this token? And you said, I'm broke and I needed to get a flight back to Australia. And I think that there's something very powerful about that, because in my experience, the reason why 99% of artists have ever used crypto in music so far is because they just need more money, because they also happen to be broke, And I think that there's something that's really worth highlighting there, because in music, there's a lot of different ways to build a brand, right? You can make short form content on TikTok and Instagram. There's, Patreon, there's Spotify for you to be able to access millions of different people. I feel like the area that's resonated the most with people in music has just been that it's a more likely opportunity for you to get paid. And I think that's also one of the bigger blockers of the space. But I think it's really important to recognize that the reason why people kind of fall in love with this space in the first place, and the reason why they run these fun experiments, is because they're looking for new ways to make money. And this space just allows for those opportunities to happen in a way that feels differentiated. And it feels like there's unparalleled upside. And so I don't think that we should lose that sort of belief that it's like, oh, I'm going to make it all back in one trade. It's very dangerous, obviously, but I don't know. I just think there's so much merit there. And I think that for me, the design space is actually about zooming in on like, okay, not only how do you make people money, but it's also, to your point about like everything going to zero, how do you just make these systems more sustainable, where instead of things just going from, 1 ETH up to 100 ETH floor price and then coming all the way back down again, like how do you create more consistent longevity to these markets and to these ownership opportunities where people are actually earning money in real time. And it doesn't have to be such like a buy it and then sell it. And if you miss the sell, then you feel like an idiot for the next 4 years, which is basically like what crypto is today. It's like, how do you actually design cycles where if I know that this K-pop group is going to be successful, I can buy something and be able to capture shared upside in their journey, where it's not about me having to make the psychological decision of selling their token at the top when it's pumped up 500% and you're like deciding between if Elon Musk is going to talk about Dogecoin on TV or not. Like, that's not the way that I think about like making money in crypto. I think it needs to be more like, I bought this thing that happens to kind of resemble a stock, but I'm also like earning real-time income because like I was a financial backer of this thing so early on that now I have all these network effects of being able to support myself on the back of me believing that something was going to be valuable and it actually ending up to become valuable in the first place.
Yeah, it's something in between, right? Like there's a fun analogy with trading card games. So TCG plays like, at least, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh, like Magic, they hate, a lot of them hate crypto. Mm-hmm. I mean, so do most consumers, right? And
most gamers too, and most artists, for what it's worth. Basically everyone.
That's right. Yeah, everyone. But you know, like the common, like sort of, I guess criticism is that, you know, it's just there's like this artificial scarcity related to like crypto TCGs, right? And on-chain assets. And funny enough, like people, you know, there's this pushback of like, wait, isn't there the same, you know, in trading card games, right? But like if you really look closely at trading card games, it's like there's scarcity and value accrual built in while still being relatively fair. And you know, in the sense that, you know, the value that accrues to a rare card in Pokemon or Magic, etc., it only happens over time. When the new season comes out, you can buy as many packs as you want. There's no barrier to getting started, and there's no limit to how many Black Lotuses there are. You know, there's always going to be like this rarity percentage, but that's fair across every pack, right? Effectively, and there's no limitation. It's just this open edition of you like the cards, you can buy more. You're not always going to get the same thing. It's going to be different rarities, but you can always buy more. And only when the season's over, and over years and years, do these cards grow in value. And it's like the value accrual is a lot more subtle. It's a lot longer term. It's anchored in on, I love this so much, I'm going to buy it, and then I'm going to hold on to it. And you know, then you get rewarded, right? Versus this. Right. I buy, it goes up in price immediately. I didn't earn that financial value. It's you know, the old adage of like, be wary of unearned wealth or wisdom, right? It's sort of the same thing. It's like anything that comes a bit too quick is usually going to go, right?
Right. And I think what I'm starting to recognize is that there is a spectrum of things that you buy in crypto that are meant to make you money and things that you buy in crypto just because you like them. You know, and I think right now we all expect that everything we buy on chain is going to have an opportunity to make us a return in the future. But I think it's really grounding to recognize that 99% of the things that you buy on chain aren't going to make you any money. Like, you're just buying it for a couple dollars just to say that you liked it. You know, to your point earlier, is like, I liked it, I thought that it was cool. But there will be those 1% of assets that are meant to accrue and capture value and be these things that are sort of like holding a lot more merit in the world today. And I think if we can do a better job of distinguishing between, like, you know, what is meant to go 1000x and what is meant to just be like a $2 consumable item that you have no expectation of anything happening with, I think that'll lead us to a lot healthier place. And so I want to kind of like take us from there to sort of the closing thoughts for this conversation, this episode. You guys published a market map the other week, it was, of all the investments that you guys have made recently. I would highly recommend checking it out. For people that are listening to this and are looking to better understand where your head is at on a day-to-day basis right now, what's the best place for them to stay up with you and your work? And then what are some ideas that they should take away from this conversation?
Yeah, you can check me out on chain. My username .eth. You can check out what I've been up to. But otherwise, Twitter works, you know. Honestly, I tweet a lot, but you can usually sort of see where my head is at on chain. You know, I'm using this stuff at pretty weird hours and trying stuff, exploring stuff. And if you want to, if you see something like interesting, like send it over. I'd love to check it out. I'd love to play around with what you've built. And yeah, and you know, happy to be a user. Fun
Love
fact,
that.
at 1KX, we instituted a policy where we can't pass unless we've used the product meaningfully.
That's so sick.
Right. So yeah, well, and I think you can't force usage, right? You got to use it organically. And thankfully, like in the 1KX side, we're just like, we're inherently like explorers and tinkerers of this stuff, right? It's I'm not minting these open editions to get rich. That's sort of there. I just makes you feel good. That's it, you know. And I want to support the artist. That's and I think to your point, that's just that's how it is. And I won't go deeper. There's like a lot of there's some depth there that we can like talk about in some other episode or some other time, right? But yeah, check me out on Chain. Check me out on Twitter. Yeah.
You've played such a pivotal role in my journey, just in terms of how I found friends in the space. You know, Metacartel really was the first place that I feel like I really found true friendship on chain and people that I could like really count on and rely on and just have like really vulnerable and fun conversations. And just been amazing to watch the way that you've progressed in your journey the past couple of years and being able to continually work together and do things that are exciting. You know, I can always just count on you for a very rational and honest take on like what is compelling or not as someone who's active on chain every day. And I think that a lot of investors, you don't really get that from. You know, I think that a lot of times investors are great at giving you money and just like being like, all right, now fuck off and do the thing I invested in you for and don't talk to me again. But like the one thing I really appreciate you is that you said it right there in your closing thoughts. Like if someone sends you an app, like you will actually go and use their product and make a transaction. And I don't think that that can be understated enough. So I really appreciate you just taking some time to talk, man. I feel like it's a very pivotal moment in what seems to be a new chapter in the market. And I'm excited to see what comes in the months and years ahead of us.
Likewise, I really appreciate the comments and the kind words. It's been amazing to like go through the whole journey with you alongside. So I'm sure we'll be, you know, there'll be many more years to come.
I love it. Well, thank you, Peter, for hopping on. We will see you guys again next week. And until then, I hope everyone has a wonderful week. Peace.